Welcome to the podcast, Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. I'm your host, Mike Allen. There's an island. It's located just off the coast of Mystic, Connecticut, which is beautiful, and it heals people in need of help through numerous programs held there. The organization that owns the island has certainly maximized the potential of this 11-acre masterpiece in Fisher's Island Sound. Not only does it host these programs, it's also home to one of the most beautiful dahlia gardens in the entire world, sacred art classes, freshly made jelly from fruit trees on the island, views that leave you frankly in awe, and one of the most unusual religious relics you've ever heard of. Telling the fascinating backstory of Enders Island is Father Thomas Hoar, president of Enders Island and its operations. Father Tom, more than any single person, has ensured that you don't leave this gem of an island the same as when you drove over the causeway onto it the first time. And he's going to be along in just a moment with today's story. This week's trivia question: the business of commercial parachute jumping in the United States began in Connecticut about 100 years ago. In which town did the first jump occur? We'll stick around after the main program for the answer, because then you're going to know the topic for next week's show. What do you think you would do if somebody gave you responsibility for an absolutely gorgeous 11-acre island off the coast of Mystic, Connecticut? Well, yeah, you'd need to host religious retreats, which are designed to heal people's spirits, and you'd need to keep the world-renowned dahlia flower gardens in tip-top shape. You'd also need to maintain the highly respected sacred art program for artists, and you'd need to take care of one of the most unusual religious relics in all of North America, located in the chapel on that island. Oh, and yes, you wouldn't quite have enough of a budget to cover your annual expenses, so you'd need to fundraise and find other creative ways to make ends meet. Well, welcome to Enders Island. It's the former private estate of noted Hartford surgeon Dr. Thomas Enders. Now, the only way to get there is to drive over a short bridge from Mystic to Mason's Island, and then you drive along a right-of-way road on Mason's Island to a one-lane causeway, and that takes you to Enders Island. Now, Dr. Enders and his wife Alice built a magnificent home on the 11-acre estate. Then he died, and in 1954, Alice gave the island to a Catholic ministry, the Society of St. Edmund, a ministry with major American facilities in Vermont and, yes, on Enders Island. Well, that's where Father Thomas Hoar comes into the story. The island, you see, was no longer financially viable when he first became involved in the 1990s. Maintenance was in desperate straits. 2 task forces, in fact, had recommended closing the island. Well, then Father Tom was asked to see what he could bring to it, and that was 30 years ago. Now, Father Tom, a Catholic priest, says the island calls upon people who are there to live a life of virtue. Well, today, Enders Island serves a multitude of populations who need assistance, and it's never looked so stunning and beautiful. I've had the pleasure of visiting Enders Island now twice. The experience, frankly, kind of hard to put into words, and you kind of have to experience it to fully comprehend the serenity of the place. Well, that's where our conversation with Father Tom begins. Father Tom, I'm really interested to talk about this island because it's a well-kept secret in Connecticut, the existence, for most people, of this 11-acre gem off the coast of Mystic. And what you've done with it is just remarkable, and the backstory of how we got to this point is remarkable. And I want to ask you a question. You get up every morning, you live on this island. It's gorgeous, it's stunning. You can use all the adjectives in the world, and you can't really describe it. But I'm going to ask you to do just that. When you get up in the morning, do you ever get bored and say, gee, maybe I ought to move? Or do you just say, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm here?
Well, I've been here 32 years, and I actually first came in 1970 when I was trying to discern whether to join the Society of St. Edmund. But like this morning, I had Mass over in Wesley, Rhode Island, and as I came to get in the car, I watched the sunrise. And it's spectacular. It's spectacular. And then in the evenings, we see beautiful, magnificent sunsets that just take your breath away. You know, some days when I wake up, I see the cracks and the crevices and the broken this and the broken that, and we have to attend to. But I will look and walk through the gardens in the summer, and the dahlias are spectacular. I've talked to people from all over the Northeast. I've talked to people from England, from Canada, people that have come from the Midwest because they've heard about the spectacular dahlias that are on the island. And it all started with Gail Wentworth saying, "Father, would you mind if I took that little plot there and planted some dahlias?" And that's probably 15, 18 years ago. I didn't know what the hell a dahlia was. And I said, sure. And they grew up in these stunning, stunning flowers. People were coming by and ooh and ah and about the beauty of them. And so she said, the next year, can I have that next spot next to it? Well, now we have about 400 varieties of dahlias and probably 2,000 plants around the island. And it just adds to the beauty of the site. You know what I really love? I love storms because I can sit and watch the waves hit the seawall and splash up on a nice snowstorm. This place is quiet and it's majestic. There's a beauty when the place is covered with snow that just really kind of moves my spirit. When I come downstairs in the morning, I never know who I'm going to meet and what I'm going to be asked, because people will show up unannounced seeking something. And what we offer here is healing and hope, because beauty lifts up their spirits. And when the spirits are lifted up, that's when you can help them find some hope.
So I can vouch for the dahlias. My wife and I were here when they were in full bloom, and we were, as you said, and this is no exaggeration, literally we were in amazement. We had never seen anything like this, including at botanical gardens that we've been to in major cities.
When I got here full-time in 1993, I was sent to try to rejuvenate and try some new things. Most of the gardens were either grassed over or grown over. And I can remember one hot August day, I'm out there pulling the weeds, and I'm filthy, And a woman came by and she said, "Isn't it terrible how they've let this place go to ruin?" And I said, "Ma'am, you keep praying, I'll keep working, and come back in a couple of years and you'll see quite a difference." And it has.
Well, it is remarkable what you've built here. And one of the many things you do here on the island, outside of religious retreat, is you have this full-scale art program.
It's sacred art. Art has always been a tool of evangelization in the church. In the 90s, when the wall came down in Soviet Russia, they discovered all these small Catholic communities that lived underground for 60 years or so. And the grandmothers would take their children to the cathedrals and teach them the stories of the faith by using the art. So in the cathedrals through Europe, where people were illiterate and could not read the scriptures, the stained glass told the story. And so they inspired because of their beauty. The sacred art program, we've had the opportunity to put on displays at the McGivney Center down in New Haven, and people were blown away.
I don't have to stretch my imagination when I walk onto this island to imagine what it can do to revitalize the spirit.
A lot of people don't spend, especially in the summers, spend a great deal of time in their rooms. We have throughout the island these little niches where people can sit. They can look at the water, they can look at the gardens, they can just sit and be quiet. Our motto for the island is rejoice in hope. When people cross the causeway, sometimes they don't even know why they're crossing the causeway. They'll hear about the dahlias and they'll come and walk around. Well, wondrous things happen to people. I'm always amazed. People will tell me, when I cross that causeway, there's something different about this place.
The other thing that you do here most prominently is the 12-step program. Could you explain that? It's remarkable what you do.
In 1965, Father Joe Waite was a PhD in English, teaching at St. Michael's College in Vermont, but he was a blackout drunk. And they didn't know what to do with him, so they sent him here, figuring, he's on the island and we could keep track of them. Well, the electrician that took care of the house was in AA, and he brought Father Joe to his first AA meeting and helped Father Joe get sober. And then by about 1967, they started having AA meetings here on the island. Now we have a variety of different 12-step meetings on the island, adult children of alcoholics. We have Al-Anon, we have Gamblers Anonymous. We have a whole variety. We have about 10, 11 12-step meetings on the island every week. But out of that grew retreats for people in recovery. The 11th step in AA is to increase your conscious contact with God through prayer and meditation. So we call our recovery retreats the 11th step on the rocks. But back about 2004, I started getting calls from fellows I went to college with, asking how they could help their sons. I'm in recovery 34 years at this point. And so I said, well, why don't you come have them stay with us? We got a lot of recovery here on the island, and they can work in the maintenance, they can help around the place, and we can get them into AA. Well, all of a sudden I ended up with 6 guys. And some of them had not been to college or had flunked out. But I make them all take a class at the Three Rivers Community College, a reading, a writing, and a reasoning class, no matter whether they want to be plumbers or candlestick makers or bakers, to show them that they have the capacity in sobriety, they have the capacity to learn. And we've had 3 who have gone on to Columbia University and graduated with honors. We have about an 87-85% success rate after 5 years. We have 2 lawyers, we have a PhD, we have a fellow who's in theoretical mathematics, we have 2 MBAs, we have 3 that are clinical social work degrees, and all of them are working in recovery. And so their lives change. Every time you help a person become a person of recovery, you're not just changing that person, you're changing their families and everybody they're going to interact with. I mean, a number of them are married now and they bring their kids by. You look at it and say, I remember that kid when he sat in that chair with his hoodie up shaking because he was withdrawing. Seminaries ask us to help seminarians and priests who are struggling with addictive behavior. We had one young priest who was spending 8 hours a day playing video games, and he wasn't even a year ordained. How do you minister to people if you're addicted to video games? We always have the community's Christmas dinner, Christmas Eve, and afterwards we have the tree. And we came into the living room here where the tree was, and one of the kids said, where did all these presents come from? I said, well, the people that go to church, the people you meet at meetings, people that come on retreat, they're from them. And another one said, I've never had a Christmas where people aren't drunk and fighting. You get the addiction kind of under control, and then you can start with the healing of the trauma, because that's the root of it. That's what gives me hope. That's what, when I wake up in the morning, that's the stuff that helps me to leave my room and deal with the world. We've always had enough. We don't have any reserves. I say we eat what we kill. We charge for retreats, but we've never let money stand in the way of someone coming to retreats. Somebody handed me a $2 million check and said, we want to do something in honor of Our Lady. We want you to build the chapel. And that's where the chapel came from.
Tell me the story about the jam that you make here.
When I was a novice, Father Stankiewicz, who's the superior, we have all these fruit trees. And I said, I used to help my mother make jam. And so he said, well, can you make jelly out of the grapes? I said, sure. So I made jelly for the community out of the grapes, and then apple butter and some other stuff. People in the neighborhood didn't know who we were, what we did. And so I'd make jelly out of the grapes and apple butter out of the apples, and I'd sell them to the retreatants, and name them, like the grapes of Enders, snappy apple butter, things like that. to get people to take something home that had our name on it.
And they're delicious, I got to tell you. We got ours when we came here, and it's just fabulous. I got to ask you one other question. So the chapel has all the stained glass and the important stones and whatnot. It also has a rather unique relic in it from St. Edmund, and this is his arm. Can you explain the background of that?
Well, you remember in the Middle Ages when there were wars, people could not make pilgrimages to the Holy Land, and so they would bring relics. First class relic is a piece of the body. People wanted to go and pray at saints' tombs. Edmund died in 1240. He was Archbishop of Canterbury, Edmund Rich, and he had gone to the Abbey of Pontigny because he was having difficulty with King Henry. So he was on his way to Rome, and he fell sick. And he went to the Abbey of Pontigny, and he stayed there for a while. He got sicker and sicker. They were taking him back to Canterbury, and they traveled one day outside of the Abbey when he died. They put him on a litter and started bringing him back to the Abbey. And it took them 3 days because there were healings that were taking place in these villages and towns. But they got him back, and they had his funeral, and they buried him, and all the healings stopped. And the Archbishop of Paris came 47 days after he died and had them exhume his body. And it looked like he had just fallen asleep. And so they took his body and they built a reliquary over the main altar of the abbey. But people wanted to see him. So they took his right arm, the arm that he would bless with, the arm that he would forgive with, the arm that he would anoint with, and they put it in a separate reliquary in the church. During the Reformation, when folks were destroying all sorts of things, the monks hid it away. Father Pirtle went over and brought that relic to the United States. And the Museum of Natural History said it was one of the finest pieces of natural mummified flesh that they had ever seen. It was at St. Michael's College, and then in the 1960s, after Vatican II, people weren't a little squeamish about relics. So it went up to our first parish in Swanton, Vermont. So when we were building this, I asked the Superior General if we could have the relic. And so we're stewards of the principal relic of St. Edmund in the United States.
Well, that wraps up this episode of Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. I want to thank our guest for today's program, Father Thomas Hoar. He is president of Enders Island. The answer to this week's trivia question, the question was, the business of commercial parachute jumping in the United States began in Connecticut about 100 years ago. In which town did that first jump take place? The answer is Roxbury. Next week on Amazing Tales CT, we're going to have somebody who was there when the commercial parachuting started at the grass-stripped Good Hill Airport, and a man who has done himself hundreds of jumps, including the only person known to have jumped into New York's Central Park. Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path is a production of True North Associates, LLC. This is Mike Allen. Be safe, and please stay healthy.